Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Charlie Adelson is on trial for murder, and he did something today that just about any lawyer will advise a criminal defendant not to do. He took the stand. He took the stand and testified all day long, and we're still on direct examination. We haven't even gone to cross-examination yet. Now, there's a reason, of course, why most lawyers will say that it's a bad idea to take the stand in your criminal trial. You don't have to. It's a constitutional right that you don't have to give witness against yourself. But in this particular case, apparently both the defendant and his lawyer decided it's a good idea to go ahead and say what he had to say and see what the jury thinks. So the super quick summary is Dan Markel was murdered. Garcia and Rivera, you see on the bottom, already convicted the two hitmen. The person on trial right now is Charlie Adelson. The state says he paid money to Katie McBanawa. You see her in the second row. She's also been convicted and is serving life in prison. She gave the money to Garcia and Rivera, all a murder for hire of Dan Markel, an FSU law professor. Now, Charlie was a dentist. His sister, Wendy, was recently divorced for Dan Markel when he was murdered. The state also thinks Donna, the mother of Charlie and Wendy and Harvey, thinks the whole family was involved in the decision, in the hit, in the murder of Dan Markel. So tomorrow is going to be cross-examination because the defense said it had about an hour left of questioning for the witness, for Charlie Adelson. So it could be tomorrow we hit closing arguments. That really might be more on Monday, just depending on how long things take. My guess is cross-examination will go pretty long. We'll talk about that more toward the end. So tomorrow, huge day, because the state is going to test everything that Charlie Adelson said on trial today. They're going to test it. So you do not want to miss this. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you would, please hit the like button. It'll help the video to get out to more people. So what I'm going to do is narrow this down. I'm going to show you the 12 most important minutes of his testimony. So you can decide for yourself, what do you think about how he did today? And of course, we're going to have cross-examination tomorrow, so it will all be tested. The defense, but I'm also going to tell you, in addition to that 12 minutes, I'm going to talk you through what happened today. The 12 minutes I'm going to just show you because they were so important. It's when Charlie explains his whole theory of the case, why he says it was never a murder for hire. It was an extortion attempt against him. You're going to watch him say that, and you can think about it for yourself. The defense started with 3 questions right off the bat to Charlie Adelson. Did you cause the death of Professor Dan Markel? No. Did you hire anyone to kill him? No. Did you put letters in diaper bags of Katie McBanawa to have Professor Markel killed? No. So those were the 3 question answers that right off the bat, Charlie Adelson gave. And then we got into the direct examination. Charlie stated up front that he was nervous because, quote, his whole life depends on it. What he says, what happens in this trial. Not an understatement. I wanted to throw in one thing that I thought was pretty significant. He talked about how he got the cash. You can decide whether you buy this. He mentioned several categories. One was real estate. The only specific he mentioned in that was that he rented out dock space behind his house and once a year was paid in cash for that. He also said that when he worked on staff for other dentists, he wouldn't charge for his work, but he would get paid just for the materials, sometimes up to $1,000, and he would sometimes be paid in cash. But he said primarily he got his cash from using his credit card whenever he went out to eat or do anything else and getting everybody else to give him their cash. The reason that matters is because Charlie made a massive cash payment to Katie McBanawa. That's the payment. He acknowledges he made it, that the state says was the payment to get the hit on Professor Dan Markel. So in the end, Charlie Adelson said he had $138,000 in his safe. So that's an awful lot of people paying you for the meal that you paid on your credit card, and they give you cash for it. But that was his statement about that. Now, I want to take you through several theories that the state had made and what Charlie's response to them is, and then we'll get into our video. So the state theory is that Charlie, like his mother, Donna in particular, but like the whole family, was furious at Dan Markel, who was giving Wendy a hard time about custody and whether or not she would be able to move the kids to South Florida, where mom, Donna, really wanted to spend more time with them and was having a hard time because the kids were in North Florida and she was in South Florida. So the state's theory is he was really furious. The defense tried to diffuse that by suggesting his relationship with Wendy was kind of normal for a brother sister. It wasn't all that close. They would talk maybe every 10 days or so, and her divorce didn't really affect him. Her relocation didn't really affect him. That he talked a little bit about why he understood it happened. He said that Dan was becoming very religious with his diet and everything that he wanted done around their Jewish faith, which the two families shared, by the way, with how she was cooking in the house, how Wendy was cooking, that he belittled her and was not supportive of her career. He said, I thought he was being a jerk. Charlie, though, said that he wasn't really all that angry because it wasn't directly affecting him. Then the state's next theory revolves around that hitman joke, because Charlie made what anybody would have to say is an unbelievably unfortunate joke after, if it was a joke, and people can argue it either way, but when his sister was getting divorced, he wanted to give her a gift just to acknowledge that. He asked what she needed, and his mother said she needs a TV. So he made a joke that, well, I thought about hiring a hitman, but a TV was cheaper, so I got you that instead. He said that it was, quote, the stupidest thing I ever said. And given the circumstances, he is not wrong on that. The state's theory, another state theory, was that Charlie began considering murdering Dan Markel all the way back at Halloween 2013. Dan Markel was not actually murdered until July of 2014. So this would be months beforehand. Charlie and Katie Medbanowa, Charlie's ex-girlfriend and the one who paid the money to Sigfrido Garcia and Rivera, the two hitmen, Katie said that she had talked to Charlie all the way back at Halloween 2013 about the idea of killing Dan Markel, that he wanted to do it all the way that far back. But the defense tried to defuse that with a couple of points. The first was they said that at that point, Charlie had had his first date with Katie Medbanowa just 2 weeks before he supposedly talked to her about getting someone murdered. They explained the first date was just dinner in the building where they were working late, that it wasn't anything dramatic, and it had only been 2 weeks later. They also suggested that Charlie did not know about Katie's ex-boyfriend at Halloween. Katie was both dating Charlie, and her ex-boyfriend was one of the two hitmen, Sigfrido Garcia. And he was her on again, off again boyfriend / husband. They had 2 children together. And so they had a very long-standing relationship. She and Charlie had only been together, according to the defense, 2 weeks. So at that point, Charlie put in some text messages that showed he really didn't even know who her ex-boyfriend was. So the theory being he wouldn't have known how to go hire this guy, or even that it was a possibility, because he didn't know Katie had this super dangerous criminal ex-boyfriend. Another theory the state has been pushing is that communication between Charlie and his mom, Donna, where they were texting, and Donna says, I can't talk right now. And she mentions Dad, Harvey, being in the car with her, mentions Dad's birthday. The state believes that the birthday present, the 70th birthday present for Harvey, Adelson, the father, Wendy, and also of Charlie, that his birthday present was the death, the murder of Dan Markel, which would truly be macabre if that's the case. But the Charlie's team says that's completely false. That the reason the mother said, and Charlie testified today, the reason the mother said, I can't talk, is they were talking about the surprise birthday party that they were planning for Harvey. This had nothing to do, they said, with murdering Dan Markel. He wasn't to be murdered for another 2 or 3 weeks until, in fact, it would have been before that, because this was texting a good couple of months before the murder of Dan Markel. And so they're saying, look, all we were talking about was we were going to get him maybe a cruise. I was thinking about doing the catering. Charlie said, in fact, what I ended up doing was hiring the chef to come to the party and perform and do all the cooking right in front of everybody. And none of this had anything to do with the death of Dan Markel. The state also theorized that of course, Charlie conspired with Sigfrido Garcia, the ex-boyfriend of Katie Medbanowa, and his current girlfriend, that they conspired together. And the Adelson team says that's crazy, because Sigfrido Garcia hated Charlie, hated him because he was still really into his ex-wife / girlfriend, Katie. Then he hated the fact that she was dating Charlie. So they put in several incidents that would relate to that. One was the jet ski incident we've heard about from other witnesses, where there was, and Charlie and Katie were going to go jet skiing. Charlie was pulling the jet ski on the back of his vehicle. I don't know if he had a truck or a car. And Sigfrido Garcia tried to run them off the road, pulled in front of them, got out of the car screaming at them, threatening at them. And Charlie had to try to back up and turn around while having a jet ski on the back. And he said he told Katie, that guy's effing nuts. And she said, oh, no, that's really calm compared to how he used to be. That same day, there was a call to Harvey, the dad, from Sigfrido, where it was a threatening message. And Sigfrido said, next time I see you, it will be mano a mano. As it turns out, this was just a mistaken call. Sigfrido meant to call Charlie, but he had the wrong number and accidentally called Harvey instead. But the defense theory is, what are the chances that Charlie would conspire with a guy who hates him this much, that within just a matter of 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks from the time of these incidents, Sigfrido would do Charlie's bidding by going to murder somebody for hire? What are the chances? That's the argument. And the final theory, before we go into our first segment of video, is that the state believes, of course, that Charlie Adelson conspired with his girlfriend, Katie Medbanowa. And the argument from the defense is they were really kind of slowly breaking up and fighting about this time. They weren't working together. They weren't planning a murder. Instead, they were breaking up. So this first segment, now the theory that we have now heard from Charlie, we heard it in opening, and it's about to get fleshed out because it was frankly a little bit confusing in opening. We talked about that at the time. But the theory that we've heard about is that Charlie was at home at the end of the day when Dan Markel had been shot, and that Katie had orchestrated this kill along with Sigfrido and Luis Rivera. And it was unclear who kind of was in charge of it, but one of them was in charge of it. They had orchestrated it so that they could have the chance to extort to blackmail Charlie. They knew Charlie was interested in Wendy moving down with the nephew. He had talked about that a lot. He had talked about the fact that they had been willing to pay Dan Markel $1 million, splitting it 3 ways, Wendy, the parents, and Charlie. They were willing to pay him $1 million if he would just agree to relocate the kids to South Florida. Now, we heard from an attorney, a divorce attorney yesterday, that that's not uncommon in Florida. That happens. And the purpose of it is not to by the kids. The purpose of it, she explained, was so that the person could travel back and forth and it wouldn't be an inconvenience to them to move. So all of that would be taken care of. Now, this was one heck of a payment, but Charlie talked about the fact that he had told Katie not just that they were willing to pay $1 million, but that he didn't need to take a loan for his third. He could pay for it in cash. And he thinks that's where she got the idea that he would be a perfect target for extortion. Or if she didn't get the idea, she blabbed about it, and Sigfredo Garcia got the idea that Charlie would be the perfect target for extortion. So putting the setting, Charlie has just heard that Dan Markel was shot earlier that day. He was shot in the head by either Luis Rivera or Sigfredo Garcia. We'll talk about which was in a little bit later with something that was said today. He was shot in the head as he was pulling into his garage at his home. They had traveled all the way from Miami to Tallahassee just to kill law professor, FSU law professor Dan Markel. And was still alive, but he died overnight, early in the next morning. So the setting is Charlie has heard that. He's had a long day at work. He is supposed to get together with Katie McBanaway. And by the way, they had a massive fight the day before, but they're supposed to get together for dinner. And he calls her and says, I just don't feel good. I feel overwhelmed. Come on over. And now, with no further ado, here's Charlie Adelson.
She just looked panicked and upset. I mean, she walked straight in and gives me this big, tight hug and asked me, like, are you okay? And I said, yeah, just a horrible day. But she looked more upset than I've ever seen her. And I'm like, are you okay? She's like, no, I'm not. I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, just come sit down. I need to talk to you.
Where did you go?
We walked into the living room.
And what happened when you got to the living room?
We sat down on the couch, and she started to talk to me. And she said, listen, this is all my fault, but I had no idea anything was going to happen, but this is totally my fault. I spoke in too much detail about your family's personal problems, about your sister, Dan Markel, and the $1 million offer.
What did you say?
I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, my friend killed Dan, and he wants to be paid $1/3 of $1 million.
How did you react?
I was like, what did you just say? And she's like, my friend killed Dan, and he wants you to pay $1/3 of $1 million.
What happened next?
I stood up, and I started cursing it. And I'm like, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? And she's like, no. I'm like, who did this? Who's your friend that did this? And she's like, I don't want to say. I can't say. And I said, who was it? And she just kept saying, I'm not going to tell you. And I was like, was it Sigfredo? And she's like, no, I'm not telling you. And I just walked in my bedroom and sat down on the edge of my bed.
What happened when you got in the bedroom?
She came into the bedroom, followed after me. She sat down next to me. She started telling me, like, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault, but I didn't know any of this was going to happen. And I'm like, Katie, I'm not going to be part of this shit. Like, I'm not going to be part of paying for a murder. This is insane. And she's like, look, if you don't pay in 48 hours, they will kill you. And I said, Katie, I feel like I'm getting extorted now.
How did she respond to that?
She got really mad at me. She got angry. And she's like, look, I'm not extorting you. She's like, I got dragged into this the same way you got dragged into this. She's like, it's my fault for running my mouth the way I did, but I'm not extorting you. Like, I'm trying to help you. So she's like, she goes, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the police? She goes, you go to the police, they'll kill you.
Did she tell you that they would just kill you, or they would also kill other people?
She said he'd come after you, he'd come after the family. Like, Charlie, you don't have a choice. Just pay the money. You said you had the cash. You said you were going to pay 1/3. Like, just do it. Like, I'm trying to help you out.
What did you do then?
I said, Katie, I don't have $1/3 of $1 million in cash. And she's like, you said you did. And I was like, no, I cash isn't. I can write a check for $1/3 of $1 million. I don't need to take out a loan. And she's like, well, you have a ton of money in your safe. And I said, Kate, I don't have that much in my safe. I do have a lot. And I said, come take a look. And I walked over to my safe. I opened it up. And I'm like, here, take a look. And I took it out in piles and put it on the dresser next to us. And I said, go ahead and count. Because that's not $250,000.
And did she count it?
Yes, she did.
How much money did she count?
$138,000.
So it wasn't 100,000, it was 138,000.
Correct.
What did she do with $138,000?
She had a big purse. She put it in her purse. And she asked me, she goes, how can you get the rest? And I'm like, hey, that's all the cash I've saved up from forever. And she said, can you go to your parents and get it? And I was like, if I go to my parents, my dad will go to the cops in a second. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to stop my dad from going to the police. Like, I could never say anything to him.
What happened next?
She asked me, she said, well, can you pay like $3,000 a month? And I said, yeah, I can do that.
Now, at this point in time, did you have any idea that she was part of the extortion?
No. She kept saying it was all her fault and that she didn't know any of this was going to happen. And she was upset.
What did she do next?
She took her purse, her keys, and her phone, and she's like, I'm going to go call my friend and see if this works for him, and I'm going to try to help you out. And she walked out of the house, and my bedroom was right next to the front door. She walked out of my bedroom outside of the front door and closed the door behind her.
When she went out of the house, what did you do?
I just paced around my house, and I remember sitting in the living room. I got a wood coffee table, and I was just sitting on the coffee table just in shock, thinking, what the fuck just happened?
What happened when she came back in the house?
She came in the house, and she was being the good guy and telling me that she's going to look out after me, and she's so sorry this happened. The same thing she was saying beforehand, and that she was going to make sure that nobody pays me a visit. And she's like, I spoke to him. You can pay $3,000 a month, or you can pay the rest off. She goes, but the $3,000 a month you're paying doesn't go towards the balance.
What did you do after she told you that?
I just said fine, and I walked downstairs into the kitchen, and I was shaking, and I took a bar of Xanax.
Where did you go?
And I walked outside from the kitchen through the sliders into the backyard. I closed the sliding glass door behind me. I think she got the picture. I wanted to be alone. And I just sat outside behind my house for a while.
Now, when you came back into the house, what was she like?
She was just apologizing and just telling me that her friend's crazy and she's so sorry, and she ran her mouth too much about everything and about the $1 million offer. And she was telling me that she was going to protect me.
Did she take a Xanax as well?
I don't know if she did. She may have, but I didn't give her one.
Did she spend the night that night?
She did sleep over that night.
Now, why didn't you kick her out?
I was in the state of shock, and I didn't think she had anything to do with it. I didn't even want to believe that she had anything to do with it.
When you came back in the house, what happened to you next?
She said, please don't tell anybody about what happened. Like, don't tell anybody about this. Never talk about this. Never talk about it on the phone. She said, never call me up and start talking about this.
So you now have, in a nutshell, Charlie Adelson's theory of the case. This is what Charlie Adelson says is what actually happened. He said, I never asked anybody to murder Professor Dan Markel. I instead was extorted by people who had done that. These people had, in fact, killed him, and they did that so they could blackmail me. There's not a full explanation there of how they believed they could come back to him, but they believed already that he was willing to put in $350,000. So he says they thought I had cash that would cover it, but knew I was good for the money, and they came after me. It was all extortion. It was all blackmail. That is, in a nutshell, what you've just seen. But that leaves a big open question, right? Which I'm going to play for you next. Why didn't you go to the police? If you're being blackmailed, if you're being extorted, Why not go to the police? Here is Charlie's answer.
Did you think about going to the police?
I thought about it, but I thought I'm going to get killed if I go to the police. It's not going to bring Dan back. It just seemed like a bad idea.
Over the days following, did you continue to go back and forth about whether to go to the police or not?
Every time I thought about it, I thought through what could happen to me, what would be the benefit versus the pros versus the cons.
And why didn't you go to the police?
I thought if I went to the police that they'd kill me.
When you gave her the cash in August,
Let me stop right there, because now what we're about to go to is an explanation that Charlie gave for why it is that he made continuing payments to Katie for $3,000 a month, $2,000 in cash, and $1,000 by check from the Adelson Institute, which was a dental practice that he and his dad shared. And why? Why did he keep paying her money? And this is going to prove to be important too, to one of the things that Charlie is about to testify to that we heard about for the first time today. So the defense theory is that these ongoing payments prove that this was extortion or blackmail. If this had been murder for hire, it'd have been in and out, over and done. You don't keep paying somebody in a murder for hire. You pay once, it's done. Or you pay in advance, and a little bit afterwards, or evenly divided, but it's done. It's not something that lasts over time. In fact, hitman Luis Rivera testified to the same thing, that that's not how murder for hire is done, that the way that's done is with a one-time or two-time payment, and ongoing payment isn't the same thing. So, but in fact, Katie Midbanua was continuing to get cash from Charlie Adelson. Defense says this is proof that this was blackmail. So this is Charlie's explanation for why he continued to pay $2,000 in cash a month and $1,000 by check from his dental practice to Katie Midbanua.
did she make any request of you?
Yes, she did.
What request did she make?
She said, look, none of this money's going to her. She's giving all the money to her friend. She said, can you do me a favor? I need to get health insurance for my kids. Like, I'm helping you out. Nobody's going to ever pay you a visit. Can you give me $2,000 in cash for my friend and write me a check for $1,000 every month? And that way, she said she'll cash it, give the money to her friend, and then that way she can get health insurance for her kids.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit.
So Charlie's explanation is that Katie just said, well, if we're going to be making these extortion payments, would you mind structuring it so I look like an employee and can get some kind of medical insurance for my children? Or maybe because she was employed. I don't know exactly how it worked, but somehow this would manage to get her health insurance. She said, would you mind doing it that way? And he said, okay. Now that choice led to something really important, because Donna Adelson wrote the checks for the Adelson Institute. Charlie is now going to explain Donna's involvement in this whole situation. He said he went to her house to pick up the checks. She said they're on the counter, but she said, why are we paying Katie Midbanua? Now, remember, for years, the state had believed that, and I don't know whether the Adelsons fostered this, but they believed that Katie was supposedly an employee, and they had managed to prove that she was not working for the Adelson Institute at all. They brought witnesses who said, no, she never came to work, never showed up. So these payments, the state believed, were undercover payments in order to compensate her for the murder for hire. But Charlie has a different story. Here's his conversation. He's about to tell us about his conversation with his mother, Donna Adelson.
My mom was there, and I don't think my dad was there at the time. He wasn't there at that time.
Was he there or
No,
wasn't he?
she was alone. There was no one else there.
Now, when you went to go pick up the checks, what happened and what do you remember?
I remember walking in and saying hi to my mom, and she's like, oh, the checks are over there on the counter like you asked for. And I saw there was a white envelope and there was a stack of checks sitting there. And she said, what's Katie doing for you? And I thought we'd already addressed it, but she's working at the office, and I'm like, no, I told you she's not. She's like, well, $1,000 a month is a lot of money to pay somebody. And she's like, what exactly is she doing for you? And I said, it's a long story. And then she said, well, I'm your mom, like, tell me. So I wanted my mom to know what happened, but I also didn't want her saying anything to anybody. So I told my mom, I said, listen, I'm going to tell you something, but I never want to talk about it again. I never want you to talk to me about it on the phone. Don't talk about it anywhere. And please, whatever you do, do not say anything to Dad. Do not say anything to Wendy. Do not try to make me go to the police, because I'm not going. You got to promise me all that, and then I'll tell you.
And what did you tell your mom?
I told her that the night of the 18th, I got extorted for $250,000.
How did your mom react?
She flipped out.
What was agreed upon between you and your mom that evening?
That she was never going to say anything to anybody.
How about to your dad?
That not my dad, not my sister.
So Charlie has now explained how he had these additional conversations with his mother. That's his explanation for why Donna was so heavily involved, and they had a lot of private conversations that she knew. He told her the truth that he was being extorted. Now he's going to talk about why he continued to have a good relationship with Katie Medbanaway, because that's clearly something the state is going to go right for. If she was extorting you, wouldn't you immediately cut her off? Wouldn't you be angry? Wouldn't you have nothing to do with her? And he's going to explain that he continued to have a good relationship with her. In fact, it improved over time. Right then they were breaking up, but it got better. They got closer as friends. And he continued to give her gifts. And it was because he didn't believe she was part of the extortion.
Now, we've heard a lot about gifts. We've heard about Lexus with 160,000 miles. We've heard about plane tickets. We've heard about, I guess, breast augmentation, but let's put that aside because I think that's a different category. We've heard about a whole host of gifts regarding, over the next 20 months, you giving a bunch of gifts to Catherine Magbanaway. You recall that testimony in this courtroom?
Yes, I do.
The gifts that you gave to Catherine Magbanaway, was that part of the extortion? Were those extortion payments?
No, not at all.
What were the gifts?
The gifts were me trying to keep Katie happy. And I didn't think Katie was any part of this extortion at all, because she was constantly broke. I mean, she'd be hitting me up for $300. I mean, there's no way that she was getting that $3,000 and then asking me for $300 or running short on this or running short on that or can't pay a car bill.
So I want to make sure that we're crystal clear here. The fact that she was always saying she was broke, did that make you more certain or less certain that she was not part of the extortion?
It made me more certain that there's no way that she's involved. I mean, she's telling the truth. The extortion never went up. I mean, she could have just raised the extortion payment instead of having to ask me for money. Every time she was asking me for money, I actually felt good. I felt like she wasn't part of it.
So that's his explanation for why he kept up giving her gifts. And you can decide whether you believe it or not. I just want you to see what the testimony was today. Now, the next thing I want to play is a very short clip about whether or not he would ever have taken his nephew's dad away from them. In other words, they were asking, would you ever have killed your brother-in-law knowing that he was the father of your two nephews? Here's his answer.
Do you love your nephews?
Of course.
Would you ever take their father away from them?
No, never. Never in a million years.
So that is, in a nutshell, the most important testimony of the day that related to Charlie Adelson. He was on the stand all day, but I thought those pieces were the most important to show you. I may do a longer version of that at some point, but those were, in a nutshell, what his theory is. But let me take you through their response real quickly to the bump which was the FBI trying to stage an extortion, pretending to be Latin King gang members and trying to do an extortion against the Adelsons to force them to talk about the case. The way it had worked was by the time the wiretap and other undercover things were authorized, it had been 2 years since the death of Dan Markel. So they were trying to get everybody talking about the event again. So there was a bump. There was an approach to Donna Adelson on the street, handing her an article about the death of Dan Markel, along with a phone number and the number $5,000. And we went through some of that yesterday from the states, going through the text messages. But I want to give you the defense response just real quickly. First, they talked about the fact that Donna Adelson, when she first introduced, she gave Charlie an immediate call after the bump. And he said, what does this involve? And she said, it involves the two of us. And Charlie says what that meant was that she was being extorted too. And the defense pointed out, notice she didn't say it involves the four of us, it involves the family. She said the two of us. They clearly have walled Wendy off very much and are trying to wall Harvey off as well, I would say. The next thing that the mother said that they talked about was the fact that the mom said, bring cash so you can take me out to dinner. Now, obviously, what the prosecution thinks that means is he was willing to pay off these people because he knew he was guilty and they were trying to make yet another person who was trying to extort them go away. So that was what they were trying to do. And I shouldn't say yet another, that's his theory. The state's theory is that this was the first extortion, and it was their admission that they knew about this. So the defense went through sort of Charlie's reaction to that and said, well, you kind of stuttered, repeated it back. You said, is someone trying to blackmail you? And then you said, no, that's crazy. And then Charlie said, this wouldn't be the first time I've been threatened. Defense says that's because he was talking about this being the second extortion. There was also a rather cryptic comment from Donna about this TV is probably about 5. Now, the prosecution says TV is sort of code for the murder of Dan Markel and the hit. And Charlie says, no, this was all about the $5,000 payment that would be another extortion. He immediately asked Donna when she called him, said, what did the guy look like? Was he black? Was he white? Was he Hispanic? And he said the reason he asked those questions is because he was asking himself, wondering, could this be Sigfrido Garcia? Is that who it is? They also talked about the fact that he didn't talk about, he told his mother, don't talk about this in the apartment. Don't talk about this on the phone. There's a chance the police were listening, is what he said. He said he didn't want the police to know he was being extorted. The reason was if they found out about this extortion, they would ask questions and they would find out about the first extortion and his life would be threatened because they had told him if he ever went to the police, then either his life would be in danger or his family's life would be in danger. I want to say thank you, Marlon. I appreciate that. Now, the mother also said that they brought up the ex-girlfriend, and that's all she said in this conversation with Charlie. The state has made a lot of the fact that after that, he immediately called Katie Mabanawa. No other ex-girlfriends, could have been several others, but instead he called Katie. And they say, why would he do that? Because he knew he was guilty. He knew he had hired through her hitmen to kill Dan Markel. That's why he called. So the reason the defense explained he called Katie is this was another extortion, and there was only one he'd been involved with as to an extortion before, and that was Katie. It wasn't that she was his only ex-girlfriend, it's that she was the only one who had extorted him before. The final point that the defense made that I thought was super important, and then I'm going to tell you about what they did for the remainder of the day, how they handled it, was that Katie told him that Sigfrido was high on drugs and it was Luis Rivera who shot Dan Markel. That certainly fits better with some of the information that we had, like the fact that Luis was initially planned to be the person who would do the shooting. That was what happened when they went up the first time to kill Dan Markel. Luis turned state's evidence and went first. And so who actually killed Dan Markel is I guess not exactly known whether it should have been one of the two of them, but it's unclear which one of the two. They then went meticulously through and had Charlie explain all of the really bad evidence against him from his point of view and make it fit into the defense theory of the case. For example, they said, if you had any evidence, he said at the Dolce Vita recording when he was speaking to Katie Mbanawa, and it was recorded by undercover operatives, undercover cops who had recorders right there and listened to the entire conversation. And he told Katie, if they had any evidence, we would have already gone to the airport. Now that sounds terrible, right? It sounds like they're ready to run. And if there's any evidence the Adelsons are out of here, they're headed out. Here was the explanation of that.
All that?
Yes, I do.
What were you saying here, and what was it in context to of what had been said before?
Okay, directly before that, Katie was talking about it being police, and she thinks it's the police. And I'm like, it's fine if it's the police. Like, we're innocent. They're not going to have any evidence. If we had anything to do with this, I'd be going to the airport right now. What you're saying is it's the police. Like, they're not going to have evidence to show that we did something that we didn't do.
Charlie, without getting into all the details that I did with Agent Sanford, this
I think I recorded that at slightly higher speed. I listened to him pretty fast. So what I'm going to add this to the stage, mostly so that the hopefully blurry video isn't driving everybody crazy. I don't know what the problem is. I have my 100-foot cord plugged directly into the modem, so I don't know. In any event, we'll keep going because you can at least hear. I know that for sure. Everybody said that. So they're saying, look, Charlie had an explanation for every one of these pieces of evidence, and they are going through each one individually. The reason they're doing that, and it's well done, frankly, from a defense point of view, is they're trying to take away the prosecution's cross-examination. If they left all this out there, then the prosecution has an easy, isn't it true that you said you'd have already gone to the airport? And he's not allowed to explain that. He just has to say yes or no, I said that. For example. So what they did was pull all of that out and all of those pieces, try to explain them so that when the cross-examination happens, the jury remembers what his explanation was. It was well done from a legal standpoint, I thought. From a legal craft standpoint, I thought they did well on that. Now, they also talked about why he didn't mention extortion with Katie. He said, I was being careful. I wanted her to help me. And if I threaten her, she's not going to help me. He talked about why he hoped it was the police. At least he claimed he hoped it was the police, and said, I wasn't part of the murder. Why would I be afraid of the police? I'm not really worried about that. And said, they talked about why he didn't go to the police. I played you that clip that explained what his argument was, and said he was worried, if I go in, they're going to ask too many questions. They're going to find out about that first extortion, and I'm dead. I am dead. He had a really interesting recount of the sushi restaurant experience with Harvey. We talked a little bit about that. I showed you that picture. I said I couldn't understand word one of what they said, but we got a little bit anyway today on the direct examination. There was a picture with little holes because it was taken through a mesh on the side of the bag that contained the camera equipment. And Charlie's explanation of it really was pretty interesting, that a rude guy came and set a bag on the table. It was 9 p.m. They're in a sushi restaurant, and the guy doesn't order sushi. He orders a salad. And Charlie thinks to himself, I think he's an agent, because who goes late at night by themselves to a restaurant that has food they don't even like? Why would you do that? And Harvey, and he said, I think there's a recorder in that bag. And Harvey said, can they do that? And Charlie said they can if they have a warrant. Now, he also talked about, at that conversation, talking about Tato, which was a nickname for Sigfrido Garcia, being a real, Tato was Rivera, Luis Rivera, was a real person and head of the Latin Kings, the gang. The dad says, go to the police. And Charlie says, no, I think it is the police. So the defense throughout suggested that Katie was guilty. The defense really threw Katie under the bus. They want to blame Katie for the murder, for hiring Garcia and Rivera, but not through Charlie Adelson, just on her own. She, for example, they went through some things she did that she told Sigfrido she was worried that the Adelsons will go to the police. that Sigfrido got rid of his phone when that happened, that Katie told Charlie, I'm calling that number you've given me over and over, that she said Sigfrido left a message. All of that was lies. She had not actually done that and had reinterpreted. And then the defense reinterpreted the evidence that the state has made a lot of. For example, the state says that the state pointed out that Charlie made comments like to Katie Medbanwa, the government doesn't know what's really going on here, or made statements like, I think the people coming for us now are not from the first layer, but the second. And the state says this shows Charlie is guilty. This shows Charlie knows about the murder. But the defense says, no, let's reinterpret it. What Charlie is saying is the government thinks this is about murder for hire. This is really about an extortion, and they don't know about it. They have no information about that yet. So I want to say thank you to Harley. Yeah, it was a long day at trial. It definitely was. And they went over too. Unlike yesterday when they stopped early, they actually went over. So thank you, Harley. I appreciate that. So Charlie is still on the stand, and it's still direct. They have not yet finished going through all the evidence. The state will cross-examine, and cross-examination is the fastest possible. It's always some of the most interesting things that happen at trial. So tomorrow is going to be amazing. You definitely want to hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens tomorrow. They have mentioned having 2 witnesses potentially for the defense without mentioning Charlie. As it turns out, they said this Charlie is probably their last witness for the entire trial. The state said it's probably not expecting to have a rebuttal, so no more witnesses from the state. They will end with the cross-examination of Charlie, and then there might be some redirect, but that will be the end of the case, apparently. They'll move into charge conference. That's where the lawyers talk to the judge about what the jury charge will be, and there are always a lot of arguments around that. And finally, closing arguments. Will it happen tomorrow? I don't know. It really depends on how long Charlie is on the stand. If it goes fairly long and then they argue the charge, the judge may well send the jury home for the day and then start with closing arguments on Monday morning. I wouldn't be surprised, but especially because that gives the jury a chance to sort of more cohesively start its deliberations rather than starting at the end of the day or hearing the deliberations and coming back on Monday. So that might happen. We'll just see. You never know with trial. I want to say thank you to A. Sparky. I appreciate that. And I'm going to pop through and see, are there some questions we can answer? And Drew says, understand, that is too cryptic for me. I think you were talking to someone else. Okay, Karen asking me, they fill the dad in, and the next they go out, and the dad talks in code. There was a lot of discussion today about code and whether some things were in code and some weren't. I found the whole code thing difficult because I think the state took the code too far. I think the state interpreted some things as code that weren't. On the other hand, clearly there were times when they were definitely talking in code and confusing the daylights out of everybody. I read through some of that yesterday and got kind of tickled just watching them unable to communicate because they were trying to go in code. So the dad talked in code. Everybody talked in code from time to time. What you think that means depends on whether you buy Charlie's theory of the case or the state theory of the case. All right, let's see what else. I'm going to sit down the bottom. What defense would you have used if Charlie was your client? Frankly, I think they've done real well. I think they are trying to make this fit all of the evidence. They're trying to take it through and put it for piece after piece after piece of evidence, make it fit. And they're really working hard on that. Did I think they did a good job today? Yes, I did think they did a good job today. I've heard a lot of people say it was kind of dull and boring, and that may well be. Direct examination is never the exciting gotcha that a cross-examination is. It's just not. It's not even allowed to be that or designed to be that. So it's never as interesting. But what they're doing is meticulously, as I said, trying to defuse all of those cross-examination points that the state would like to make with Charlie. So it will come down to what the jury thinks about Charlie. And I am curious what you think. What have you been thinking about this? Do you feel like do you have a lot of questions about whether he's telling the truth? Did it seem pretty legitimate and believable to you? I would be very interested to know what you think. And if this ends in a mistrial, how many times can the state retry him? I can't say for sure in Florida, but in general, there's usually not a limit. There is more of a practical limit. So if you end in a mistrial, you could keep going. I don't know if there's a law to the contrary in Florida. S. Cypher asking me, they did nothing to cause this. Why would they think the police are out to get them? One of the questions I had was, okay, if they are if they really believe the police are following them around, the police have this bad next to them, it could be the police doing the bump. They have to know they are at the center of the investigation into the death of Dan Markel. There's some reason, right, why they're being followed around. That has to be the case. It can't just be that they suddenly were approached. Why would the federal government or state government just suddenly begin following them around? They have to have some reason for that. And so it seemed to me like that alone might be a reason why you then might go to the police and say, I've now been extorted. So, but you heard his explanation for why he did not. And you can make your choice as to whether you believe that or not. Let me keep going down. What was the deal with the text messages that would prejudice the jury against them? I know. Wasn't that interesting? I can tell Chris B was watching. It was very interesting. There was a point at which the defense wanted to put in an entire set of text messages. And I thought they had a really strong argument about that. I thought their argument was, look, the state said there were 25 messages between Charlie and Katie. And suggested this shows they were real worried about about being pursued. They were nervous. So that's why they were communicating so much. So Charlie's side wanted to put in what were the text messages. And they said they wanted to do that to show this was nothing. It was just like, hey, how you doing? Would 9 be good? No, 7 is better. Got the kids. It was like nothing. We don't know that for sure because the judge said, no, I'm not going to let you put all of those in. And he said something about the suggestion was insult some of the jurors. Some of the things might be offensive to the jurors, and he was trying to protect the defense. But it was the defense that wanted to put that in. So I was truly unclear on that. But in any event, the judge allowed them to use individual messages. But the defense said, look, the point of what we're trying to do here is we're trying to put all of these in so we can show in context that there was the implication by the state that there was a whole bunch of communication and it had some nefarious reason. We want to show that's false. This is just nonsense. There's no real meat behind this argument. And so I thought that was fascinating too. I would have liked to know more about that, but that was about all we got. All right. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. We're going to be covering tomorrow the cross-examination. It will be unbelievable. It will be so interesting. I know you're going to want to hear about that. If you would like the video, it will really help it get out to more people, and I would appreciate that. Thank you to Marlon and to Mama Pinks for moderating for us tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow at 7.